Reintroduce yourself to Judge Geeker.
Your Honor, my name is Patrick Gonzalez.
And how will you?
I'd like to give this statement. I haven't spoken at all during the whole ordeal. I've never made a statement, never done any of that. I want for the record to be able to say something about this. Your Honor, just stand up.
All right, Mr. Gonter, have you prepared a statement in this matter?
Gonzalez, yes, sir. I have prepared a statement.
Sorry, Mr. Gonzalez. Are you nervous like I am?
Extremely. Extremely.
If you would it help you to read the written statement you made?
Yes, it would, sir.
Okay, would you read that as clearly and plainly as you can, and try to speak into the microphone so everything you say can be recorded?
Yes, sir. When the government brings a person to trial, it's an incredible phenomenon that most of us automatically assume that the defendant is guilty, at least guilty of something. Oftentimes, after the media gets a hold of a story and politicians get an opportunity to get a little face time on television or in the paper, the assumption of automatic guilt intensifies, like in this case. Whether the defendant was guilty or not, it intensifies. What the average citizen tends to forget is that there are safeguards against such inflamed public passion. According to the Constitution, a defendant is to be considered innocent unless proven guilty. And that is not just to protect innocent defendants, but for the protection of all of us against the tyranny of prejudice, bias, and preconceived opinions. For example, in this case, the government accused me of the murders of 2 innocent people. Countless press conferences and interviews precipitated a wave of public passion that reached the citizens of the entire world. As politicians, I believe it became impossible for Mr. Morgan and Mr. Edens to protect my rights or the families, rather than further their own political careers. Thank God for the Constitution. The Sixth Amendment protects my rights, and I hope that this court will not allow that guilty verdict to stand. The government did not prove their case in court, but instead presented their case to the public via the media. Please don't let this fast food style approach to justice trample on the Bill of Rights and the Constitution that was set up to protect me, to protect all of us from such tyranny. When the government puts someone in the limelight, saying that I'm a horrible person, etc., but doesn't bring them to court, how do I rebut that? From the very beginning of this ordeal, I have professed my innocence. Also, from the very start, the government has announced to the world that I was guilty. Sheriff Morgan and State Attorney Edens, representing the government, wove a complicated conspiracy story for local, national, and international media outlets to broadcast across the nation. They made multiple appearances on entertainment television talk shows, as well as some national news programs and radio talk shows. They spoon-fed the public claims of evidence that never materialized, and they introduced alleged star witnesses who would never appear in court, like Hugh Williams. They did this while hiding behind the First Amendment and using it to preempt my Sixth Amendment rights. The government knew that what they were doing was illegal and unethical, but they also knew and know that their actions are rarely, if ever, questioned or disciplined by the courts. In this particular case, it was so obvious that the sheriff and state attorney set out to garner as much publicity as possible. They made shocking statements about military tactics, ninja garb, ties to organized crime, conspiracies that cross state lines and international borders, promises of a story that would play out like a summer action flick, and as David Morgan said, a real humdinger. They took an awful, horrible tragedy and politicized it. Neither my legal team, nor my family, or anyone else has represented me has called a single press conference, granted any interviews, and believe me, many were requested, or made any public statements to respond to any of the pretrial allegations made by those representing the government. Basically, I was tried and convicted in the media with the participation and assistance of the Sheriff's Department and the Office of the State Attorney that represent the government. They promised to present forensic evidence, video evidence, and eyewitness evidence against me. But what they didn't say through the media was that there was no real evidence connecting me as participating in those crimes, because I am not guilty. I was looking forward to seeing all the so-called indisputable evidence presented in court. I truly believed that I would not have had to say anything, and the fact of my innocence would prove me not guilty. It was interesting for the last year and a half almost that the state was telling the media and the public about all of these witnesses and all of these so-called co-defendants that would be testifying against me. But what happened to them? How come they only called 2 scared kids who both admitted that their hands were bloody and that they were testifying in hopes of getting 2 extremely reduced sentences, and that basically their testimonies were slot machine confessions? For example, they would tell one story, cha-ching, cha-ching, that wasn't good enough. They told another one and another one until finally they got what the state wanted them to tell. Obviously, conscious misrepresentation to benefit themselves. Although the sheriff and state attorney used the grief and tragedy of the Billings family to help them accomplish their objectives for what I believe is political gain, I would not stoop to that level. I am not guilty of the charges that the media and the jury convicted me of. I believed that the truth would prevail in court, and also every time that those murders were splashed across the television, the internet, or in magazines or newspapers, the Billings children and my children would be victimized again and again. I was confident that the prosecution's evidence or lack thereof would prove itself to be smoke and mirrors. The state produced a murder weapon that they were able to prove through forensic testimony fired every shot that killed the victims. They also proved through expert testimony that the gun had 4 different persons' DNA on it, none of which belonged to me, the defendant. No testimony linked the gun to me, the defendant. The state never produced any evidence or testimony that the murder weapon had ever been in my custody or control. In fact, the state admitted that the gun had been discovered in a car owned by a man named Hugh Wiggins. At no time did the state prove that I had ever been connected to the murder weapon in any way. The gun wasn't linked to me. It was found inside of the car of Hugh Wiggins, the guy that was given immunity to testify against me, that wasn't called to testify. Not one scintilla of physical evidence placed the defendant, me, at the crime scene, or with the murder weapon, or behind the wheel of the getaway vehicle, and not with the victim's safe, or on the video of the crime. Not one person, nobody testified that they had witnessed anyone kill the victims. Nobody testified that they had witnessed anybody kill the victims. Why did the state not bring Hugh Wiggins to testify to connect me to the crime? If I did this crime, if he was involved with this, the guy that's got the gun, that's got the safe, that's got a bunch of automatic weapons. From the very beginning of this whole ordeal, I have professed my innocence. Regardless of the law enforcement and prosecutorial misconduct that occurred even prior to this case going to court, the very conviction from the jury should be reversed due to the lack of evidence which didn't prove me guilty. I wasn't guilty. I'm not guilty. The prosecution did not produce any evidence that I'd ever even been to the crime scene, that I'd ever touched or had any control or contact with that murder weapon, or that the getaway vehicle was even the same vehicle found at Gonzalez Sr.'s residence, or that I'd ever been seen driving or controlling either one of them. And finally, people from all across the country watched this trial, and they too saw the prosecution did not prove their case. I appreciate their support. Other people question how the highest profile case in Pensacola's 400-year history, only 3 days after jury selection was done, a 3-day, whether I'm sentenced to death row or life in prison, I'm still not guilty of those charges. I shouldn't have been found guilty just because Mark O'Brien in the Pensacola News Journal said so, or because Larry King, Nancy Grace, and Sheriff Morgan broadcasted it to millions of people around the world. The government brought me to trial. The burden of proof should have been on them. Was on them. The government and the media declared my guilt outside of the courtroom. But inside, they just did not prove their case. I'm not guilty. I should have been found not guilty. And I expect my attorneys to make another motion for a verdict of acquittal and for justice to be served. Not the fast food style justice admitted via the media, but the kind that is the law.